Hello there, Qckslvrslash, and today I have a review of the Tier 8 German cruiser, the Admiral Hipper, and this one is coming to you because it was a request. I love getting comments and questions, and individual on Reddit asked for my opinion on the Admiral Hipper as they were grinding towards it, and they wanted kind of my take on how I feel about the ship. And you know, guys, if you ask me for it, if I can get it to you, I'm always going to try to put in the effort to make sure I can and put out something informative. So the Admiral Hipper herself was the second Tier 8 cruiser that I got. The first was the New Orleans, and then I got the Hipper, Mogami, and the final was the Chapayev. And the Admiral Hipper and I have had a tenuous relationship at best. I don't know what it was, but something about this ship and me just don't entirely mesh. The York I had a really good go in, and then I got the Hipper, and sometimes I just can't make things click, and other times they go great. And part of it comes down to is my playstyle. I like to get in close, really mix it up, or kind of stay passive, and the passive part is definitely what the Hipper does best. But I feel the Chapayev does it a little better as far as sitting back and just lobbing tons and tons of shells at enemy battleships. Whereas I came into the Hipper mentality-wise with, I need to play this similar to the New Orleans, which wasn't really good, because the New Orleans, I got in close, I mixed it up with the DDs, I would try to kill them, and then I'd use longer range gunfire and maneuverability to beat BBs. The Hipper herself, though, is a very adequate ship. Survivability of 58, 43,800 hit points, which is more than enough. Beats out the Mogami and the Chapayev by a long shot, and part of that came when she got the Sea Hull, the Atlantic upgrade. But her armor leaves a bit to be desired, but to me this is typical of the German ships. As you can see, 13 to 160 millimeters, but when you peel back those outer bulges, her main citadel is really only protected by 80 millimeters, and that leaves her very vulnerable to both citadel hits and engine incapacitations, rudder incapacitations, so on and so forth. When you strip everything back, her barbettes and turrets are pretty much the exact same. And while I've never experienced having to have lost many of the turrets, they do get stunned from time to time. And in general, driving these German ships, I find myself getting a lot of citadels, and it makes me tenuous as far as trying to get aggressive. The same holds true to the Mogami and the Chapayev and the New Orleans. But with New Orleans, you can go nose on. You've still got 6 guns facing forward compared to the 4 of the Admiral Hipper, and the Chapayev, because they're smaller caliber, has that great rate of fire. And both those ships, I think, suit my playstyle just a little bit better. As far as her artillery goes, she has a rating of 70, which beats out the Mogami and the Chapayev and the New Orleans. And these 203s shooting AP are great. Really good shell velocity out of them, 925 meters per second, both AP and HE. And to me, that is an important stat because you don't have to accommodate a different shell type. You can switch between the two and maintain the same aim point, and you're going to get hits. Her turrets are really responsive, 180 degree turn time, 19.6. Dispersion is good, reload is good, and the damages are adequate. It's what you expect out of a Tier 8 cruiser. Where she does exceed is, I'd say, her shell range, 17.7 versus the 15.7 of the Mogami and the 17.3 of the Chapayev. So they're fairly similar, and if I recall, the Americans are a little bit less, but I've sold the New Orleans when I moved on to the Baltimore because for me, Tier 8, the ships I'm going to be best at competitively are destroyers and battleships. Now, the one place that I find kind of puts Admiral Hipper in a weird spot is torpedoes. As you can see, 6 kilometer torpedo range, which puts her longer than the Russians and their 4 kilometer torpedoes, but far short of the 10k you can get out of the Japanese torpedoes. And that puts you in a bit of a weird spot because you can fire them from kind of mid-range. You don't have to get up close and personal like the Chapayev, but when the Chapayev gets up close and personal, her rate of fire with AP and that very flat trajectory can become very deadly, and the torpedoes are an absolute killer. In the Mogami, you can stay at range and fire those 10k torps out almost stealth, and people don't seem to expect them coming. With the Hipper in that 6 kilometer range, people, I find, tend to expect the torpedoes coming into the water. Not always, and you do get hits sometimes, and I find myself getting 2 to 3 torpedo hits a game, but the range kind of limits their usefulness, and I find they're more of a last result deterrent. You know, when you need to turn and get away, you fire the torpedoes off and it forces something to turn away from you and break pursuit. Her AA is very adequate, a rating of 72, well beating the Mogami's 40, and also beating the Chapayev's 58. Comes in slightly behind the American in the New Orleans, but part of that comes to your captain's build. Maneuverability, adequate, 32 knots, really good top speed. You compare that to 34 in the Mogami, but the thing with the Mogami is she's the size of a frickin' battleship. So yeah, she's got speed, but she's not hard to hit. And the Chapayev, very similar speed, 1 knot difference between the two. Turning radius of 740 meters and rudder shift of 8.6 seconds. Very maneuverable, and really that comes into the second part of how I use the ship, and that's when you are hunting destroyers as a cruiser, you need a good rudder shift. Her concealment, 12.4 kilometers. I haven't built her up for concealment, and overall I would say that's on par. 11.7 for the Mogami. Once again, she's just a massive ship, and 11.6 in the Chapayev. So the Hipper can definitely get in closer. Well, no, sorry, not closer. She's spotted from farther away, which I don't actually entirely understand, considering the size of the ship is smaller than the Mogami. But when you jump into modules, you can see how I have her built. I've done main armament modification 1, main battery mod 2. I really feel keeping these turrets and boosting that already good response speed is important. Damage control 1, it's pretty much all I run out of these. I don't feel the usefulness of the percentage chance decreasing incapacitation compared to reducing a risk of fire. I've gone with rudder shift and then concealment here just to tamper that down a bit. As far as mods go, it's kind of a tough call. I personally went for the hull first, all the way to the sea hull before going for the gunfire control, because the stock gun fires to 16.1, which is still good for a cruiser, and you only get a mild increase up to 17.7. If gun range is your primary concern, unfortunately you cannot boost that up, and you've got to just operate in that window that you're offered. whereas the hull, you can see, really ups your AA towards that C hull, which is the full AA complement. You've got a couple of these guns on the bow, and then the stern of the ship is just littered with those anti-air guns, and you've got the dual purpose throughout the ship. As far as the captain on the ship goes, you can see I've got a very skilled captain in this. At tier 1 I've gone with basic fire training and basics of survivability. At tier 2 I've got fire prevention and last stand, and I feel last stand in the German ships and the Russians very critical because your engines just seem to get knocked out all the time. At tier 3 I have high alert. I'll probably shift this over to superintendent once I get into the tier 9 with that repair skill. And at tier 4 I've got advanced fire training, just further boost that AA. Unlike the Mogami, which I can hop into, and you can see I've gone for demolition expert, the fire chance on the Hipper just doesn't warrant that, and I feel making yourself a better all-around ship is the key to success in the Hipper. And overall, that's kind of my summary of the Hipper. It's a great all-around ship. It can kind of do everything well. It doesn't have a strong point. You know, the Americans, it's anti-air. The Japanese, better torpedoes. The Russians, better rate of fire. The Hipper is kind of the jack of all trades, and if you play her right and respect her limitations, you can have some great games in her. So you've seen how I've got it set up. Let's get into some gameplay. So we joined myself partway through this first game of the review, and I've already managed 5,600 damage, and that was to the North Carolina using the AP. And the AP in the Hipper is one of the sweet points. The German AP shells just seem to do well, and it could come down to arc or shell velocity, I'm not sure, but they seem to be very reliable shells to fire. And unfortunately, as you can see, I've got a North Carolina angled. I'm trying to use HE, hoping for the fire, and the lower fire chance compared to the Japanese of these German shells just aren't coming through for me. But the one thing you will notice here, North Carolina fired, I went full astern, hard over on the rudder. Shells missed me by a mile. And as long as you've put your skills into that quick rudder shift and you're aware of when things shoot, if you react as they shoot, using some hard rudder and engine, you can completely dodge shells in this ship, and it is kind of one of the nice things about the Hipper. And really at this tier, any cruiser you're driving, you have to be able to do that. You've got to be continuously altering your course, making sure battleships don't have the chance to just citadel you to the bottom of the sea. So already looking at this match, I've got a pair of friendly destroyers getting really close to the cap. 3 enemy battleships are basically driving into the middle of nowhere on this map. And the one thing I find on Northern Lights is if you're not playing on domination, there's really no need to be over in the 9-10 line. Or, for that matter, the 1-2, as you can see a number of their ships. You can't affect the battle over there. You've got to stick to kind of this 3 to 8 core of the map and focus on your cap and the enemy cap. So with that North Carolina and the Fuso there well behind the mountain, there's no chance of me getting to them. But I can see there are some enemy ships defending the base, and it looks like there may be an AFK Benson there. Hard to tell, may just be a late loader. And I'm going to focus on trying to get some damage into this New Mexico while I can, and then really push on cap to try to help those destroyers. You can see I run damage control, hydroacoustic, and the fighter, because as I was saying in the port, this is a great all-around ship, and I feel mixing hydroacoustic with the fighter gives you a better all-around approach. Not everyone is going to enjoy that kind of playstyle, and there are times that hydroacoustic feels kind of useless to have, but it helps you find torps. If you're escorting a battleship, you can activate it and help spot those torpedoes early and really protect them. And if a destroyer decides to put up a smoke screen, you're going to see right through it, and you can start using those quick reloading 203s to rip through them. As I'm going to try to do this Mitsuki, unfortunately I over or underestimated how quickly they were slowing down, so that entire volley missed. And you're going to see me put my fighter up in there right here. And a lot of people, particularly I find in battleships, choose to use the spotting plane over the fighter. But the reason I like the fighter a lot of times is in battleships and cruisers, that 6-minute on-station time can be very useful. But what you get a lot, as with that Benson, is you get people who haven't deactivated their anti-air end up shooting at your fighter and revealing themselves. And that's part of why I use them on battleships as well, for those who have wondered that. You can see the hydroacoustic giving me more than ample warning as to where and when torpedoes are coming at me. I light a fire on the Benson, and I'm just going to let that burn. Get a close quarter expert in the end with the secondaries, which, I mean, he would have died from the fire any second there, and I was looking for the Mitsuki to shoot at. Once again, nice early warning from the hydroacoustic search, and I've got to kind of decide what gap I want to shoot here, and I decide that's the wider one, get the rudder over, and thankfully I've got that quick quarter shift to dodge the incoming shells. And I'm going to use the enemy smoke screen to their disadvantage here. Right before I killed that Benson, he laid a nice long smoke screen. I get inside of it. The Mitsuki ends up biting the dust to our Fubuki, and I put torps in the water at this Colorado. And at this point, this guy's kind of screwed. These torpedoes aren't great at long range, but at close range they're nice and quick. They do some great damage, and by the time he sees them coming, it's too late. He's turned broadside on, and he eats an entire volley, killing himself. So at this point, my focus shifts to this Otago. You can see myself loading AP, and I'm going for citadels here. First volley, a little far aft, but still 7,000 damage. And already almost good for the next volley. I correct my aim, and he's firing HE back, and another 9 grand to him. And you can see how quickly these guns can really stack damage up. Next volley is another 11,000 damage. Secondaries start firing at him, and he's going to be dead with the final volley. For me, that was a really solid game in my Hipper. 304,000 credits, 3,600 experience, 87,000 damage, and 70 shells, 3 torps, and 2 kills, and a couple citadels at the end there on the Otago. Now, the Hipper's AP is devastating when you get the chance to shoot it, and I think I showed it right at the beginning there. When I hit that North Carolina, I got 6,000 damage. So it's a very usable ammunition type, even at range against battleships or even mid-ranges. They're just really strong shells, and the HE I just don't find is quite as good as on some other vessels. I got into their cap, I got aggressive, I used the hydroacoustic and the good rate of fire and turret traverse to take out the DDs. I then hid in the smoke and got some torps, and to me that's kind of how you have to play the Hipper. You've got to be dynamic, keep yourself at range when you don't have islands and things to hide, and then just dive in and attack. Overall, second on my team, just behind our Fubuki, 1619 experience, and you can see how much damage I managed to do to that Otago in just a couple quick volleys. Overall, walked away with 148,000 because I do run a lot of premium stuff on this ship, and 3600 experience. But let's get on to another battle. And for the second game, I'm joined by Flying Goomba, who is driving his North Carolina, and this has to be one of the better games I've had of late. And part of that comes to just the number of games I played in the Hipper, trying to get ready to produce this review. I was starting to figure out how to drive the ship, the fact that you have to be a little more passive in it and keep your distance, use that long fire range to really wreck your enemies, and all told, it results in this game. So early on, my role as a cruiser, playing especially in a division with a battleship, is forward guard. I've got to stay out ahead of Goomba and make sure no destroyers have a chance to sneak up on him and put torpedo barrages in and wreck his day. That enemy Bismarck spotted early on, and I put a volley of AP out at him, because at that kind of 15 to 17 kilometer range, the AP on this ship, as you can see, drops almost vertically, and you can get some really good damage in with it. And I would say it's superior to firing HE, which you'll see sometimes I still fire, and that's really just me being used to playing some other ships. I don't like firing AP in a cruiser at long-range battleships. So, with both enemy destroyers now spotted, one in Bravo, one in Charlie, I no longer have to worry about Goomba really getting ambushed by an enemy destroyer, and my role now falls more to support. I've got to add on the damage as we confront a number of enemy battleships. There's a Fuso, Tirpitz, Colorado, and I believe New Mexico. I managed to get my first damage of the game in on that Hatsuharu, and it's 2 shells for 825 damage. Nothing to really speak of. My first volley at this enemy Fuso is going to be HE, and you see right away I switch over to AP. And the reason is, 12 kilometers, he's side on. I know I have the potential to put in citadels. I also know he's going to be firing right at me, so you can see I've got my rudder hard over, not even paying attention to where Goomba is until those shells have landed, and I feel bad that I'm going to be cutting him off, but I managed to get 3,000 damage in, and with that Fuso running around, I'm hoping I can get a couple more volleys of really effective damage into him. I get another good volley, 3 penetrations, 1 over pen with a couple non-pens and a ricochet. And at this point the Fusos switch targets, and that really frees me up to focus on him. Another 5,000 damage with AP. Another volley out, and I think this really shows kind of the efficacy of the AP on the Admiral Hipper. That volley doesn't do so well, but I put another one out and I decide to switch back to HE, which maybe not the best choice, but when you're not having success with one shell type, you gotta switch to the other. Unfortunately, that volley had some great success, getting one Citadel, one penetrating hit, one overpen for 8,000 damage. And it's kind of here that Goomba I had a bit of miscommunication. He turned in to duck those incoming battleships, the Torpedoes and I believe it's a Bismarck. Won't know until he's respotted. And I can't help him because I cannot afford to get that close to battleships. Yes, I have those torpedoes that are effective out to 6 kilometers, but when you get into that kind of range, battleships just seem to always manage to put citadels into you. So I'd rather stay at long range, firing my guns, and just trying to put consistent damage in. Thankfully, one of the battleships gets finished off, but Goomba's only got 20,000 hit points, and that Torpedoes can put torps into the water. Realistically, I could have gotten into A little bit sooner here, start capping and still support him, because you can see that Torpedoes has no interest in me. Focused on Goomba, and then really focused on all these other ships just to the south. So finally, I get into the cap to contest it, and I'm going to start working on the Torpedoes, and I'm focusing on trying to get to that magical 6 kilometers where I can put torpedoes into the water to harass him. So I put one on his bearing, the other about 30 degrees off. The idea being, he's a little angled into me. If he turns to his left and ends up squaring up, I feel that's where that second set is going to wind up. And you can see he has continued to turn left. The first set's going well wide, but that second volley is looking really good.
Torpedos direkt voraus. Gegnerisches Schlachtschiff gesunken.
Two of them end up connecting, but only one was required for the kill. And I make a bit of a misplay here. I drove out past that edge of the island to find the Fuso. And sub 10 kilometers, my only option is to turn nose in and hope those shells don't hit. And of the one that, at least visually, I saw connect, ricochet. So I've already fired off my port torpedoes. I've got the starboard torps left, and I'm just trying to close that Fuso to 6 kilometers where I can put more torpedoes into the water. You can see I've got hydroacoustic active just in case that Torpedoes, not Torpedoes, put some torps into the water. But it doesn't seem he did, and I start to come over, get a fire, and I put some torps in, one to the right of the island, one to the left. And when you can't aim directly at that magical indicator of where their lead is going to be, put them to the edges of land, and you just gotta hope. I get lucky there, not really eating much damage from that volley, and I have to thank the Kiev right here. He ends up attacking, torping the Fuso there, and forcing him to continue to drive straight right into a set of my torps. I end up getting my second kill. I'm 60,000 damage in, and I'm going to hang out in A until I cap it. But let's jump to a little later in the game. So, we've jumped ahead I drove into B to try to defend it. You can see the enemy team has grouped up south of Charlie, which I kind of disagree with. If you're going to group up as a team, you gotta push. It's right now 5 of us versus 4 of them, and they're not really making a consolidated effort. We've got this Mogami, there's a New Mexico, another Mogami, and Prince Eugen. And you can see the New Mexico is turned off, so it's me versus Mogami here. Gimli-tron, and I really like my odds. He's got 7,000 hit points, I have 16,000 hit points left. I'm turning off already to ensure that if he put torps in the water, I'm not square onto them and I have a chance of dodging them. I end up waiting, hopefully until my shells miss, but you can see the rear 2 turrets put them right in the island, and I managed to bounce all 3 shells off the side of that Mogami. I'm not going to make that mistake twice. I adjust my aim and connect with the Citadel, getting the kill.
Torpedoes auf Backbord.
So at this point, it's me versus Mogami, and he's got twice the hit points that I do. And most of my team is focusing in on this Prince Eugen and soon to be spotted New Mexico. So these 32,000 hit points are really mine to take. You can see the pair of us firing HE back and forth, really hoping for those fires on the opposing ship. I'm getting lucky, none have lit on me, but then again, I haven't managed to light any fires on him as well. I managed to break a torpedo tube there, which kind of allows me to turn more nose in and start to close the distance to that enemy Mogami, as I know at least one of his tubes can't fire at me for 30 seconds. I get the fire, I get lucky that those AP shells didn't connect with anything serious. And I start to close as I'm loading AP. I'm keeping my ship angled to bounce the maximum number of shots I can, and kind of hoping that he doesn't. You can see he's having to dodge those torps I put in the water, ends up connecting with one, and really, that's the end of the Mogami.
Gegnerischer Kreuzer gesunken.
So at this point, the game is all but told. We've got 2 of the caps, the New Mexico's about to get Charlie, but that's not going to matter, and the New Mexico's hit points are really just free game at this point. I'm going to finish off with 105,000. But let's jump into the post game. And that is an example of what is really the upper end for me as far as Hipper games go. 391,000 credits, 5,000 experience, and 105,000 damage. Once again, mostly guns, couple torpedo hits, managed 4 kills, only 2 citadels, and I really felt I had a big part of helping the team win that game. And to me, how I played that game is how I have to focus on playing most Hipper games, is keep my range early on, and then use some land to maybe double back, get close to a battleship, hit them with torps, but focus on using my superior gun range to really do most of my damage. For those who have watched a lot of my videos, they know I tend to play my cruisers kind of like knife fighters. I like to get in really close and mix it up, particularly with DDs and other cruisers. So, you know, for me, the Chapayev and the New Orleans are my preferred Tier 8 cruisers. The Hipper is a good ship, and I think my games in it and getting ready for this review and playing it a bunch have really reminded me that, yes, when you play smart, you can have some great games. But it's not 100% my type of playstyle, so I have to focus on just being a little more relaxed. Overall, 2237 experience in this one, and good amounts of damage across the board. Well, other than the couple things I did no damage to, and some team damage from Goomba and I bumping. And once again, unlike, say, the Chapayev, where a huge chunk of my damage comes from the fires, this one was mostly guns, and it does feel good to do that. And you can get citadels even on battleships at range if you're accurate. And I think the other thing I'd say about the Hipper is, to really get the best of it, you have to be a good long-range shooter. Because if you're very good at long range, you can outgun equal tier cruisers and just be dropping shells into them, and you're far enough away that just that narrow weave and slight speed changes really keep battleship fire from hitting you, and that's where she's the strongest. In this one, took home 238,000, 5,000 total XP, and then the commander twice as much because I've got some flag boosts going. And I think there is a commander boost event. Yeah. Anyways, I hope you found this review informative. If you enjoyed it, please give me a thumbs up and consider subscribing to the channel. It keeps me motivated, makes me put out more videos, and really, I do enjoy seeing things in the comments. So if maybe you've got some different insight or thoughts about how you like to drive the Hipper, put it down below and you can help people who watch these out. As always, I'm Qckslvrslash, and I'll have another one for you guys tomorrow.